In this tutorial we're going to look at some simple interactions with sound. So we're back in our empty warehouse level, and this time when I approach this machine I'm going to set it up so that it actually triggers off some kind of alarm sound. So the graphic itself doesn't do anything, it's not involved in this triggering system at all. Instead we're going to add a trigger actor, which you can see here. Now you'll be using a lot of these, and I'm going to go to the resize widget and I'm going to make it fairly large so it's going around our machine. If I just press W so I could see it in the top viewport there, and the other thing I'm going to do is hide that again and move it upwards so that even with the graphic there we can still see what we're doing. Okay, so when the player walks into that area they're going to trigger off an alarm because they should not be going near that machine. It's a very naughty thing to do. So I've got my trigger selected in the level, and now I'm going to open Kismet. Now Kismet is UDK's kind of graphical scripting, programming, doing stuff environment. And so I'm going to open it up by pressing that icon at the top. Now in UDK what you'll see when it decides to actually open is that we've got a bunch of different objects that do different things. So if we right click, we've got a whole bunch of different actions, conditions, variables and events, and we can do lots of kind of fun complex things with these. You can see lots of examples in the game audio tutorial level using that. For the moment I've got my trigger selected, so I'm going to right click and I'm going to say okay, I want a new event using that trigger when it is touched. So there we have our new event. Now I want the player to, every time they walk into that, to trigger an event. So at the moment the default is max trigger count 0. So it would only actually trigger once, ever. If I change that to, sorry, that was 1, and I'm going to change it to 0 so that it will now trigger an infinite number of times. Now in my level I'm going to put a new sound actor called an ambient sound toggleable, and this is going to be my alarm sound. So I'm just going to filter and find an alarm. Okay. So we've got the classic industrial type alarm, beloved of Hollywood movies. And with that selected, I'm going to right click, and this time I'm going to add an ambient sound simple toggleable. So this is a sound simple that I can now actually turn on and off. And I'm just going to move it over there so it's near to that, so it sounds like it's coming from that location. Right, so that is selected in the level. If I go to its properties, I can see that in its sound slot it's got my industrial alarm, and it's also usefully set not to autoplay. So when the level starts it's going to actually be switched off, which is good because in Kismet what we're going to do is add a toggle action, and that is going to toggle it on and off. So toggle. So when this trigger is touched we're going to toggle the toggle, and the target of the toggle will be the ambient sound simple toggleable. Bit of a tongue twister, but there you go. So I'm going to walk in, hit that trigger, toggle that, and the alarm should go on. So let's see if that works. So there's our machine. Okay, it's been alerted, alarm's gone off, panic, run around, etc. Now, you can do quite a lot with that idea, just having triggers around certain areas that start sounds. So it may be a kind of spooky violin stab to scare the player, or it may be an alarm sound or something that you interact with. So that's quite useful. The other thing we're going to have is that you notice the alarm is on all the time. So let's put in a switch so that we can actually turn it off again, so the guards don't get alerted to our presence. So I'm just looking for a button. There's no buttons, so maybe they're called switches. And I've also got it still filtering, looking for sound wave data, so that's probably why I wasn't seeing anything else. What I'm actually after is a static mesh of a button. So there is a button static mesh. So again, I'm going to put that into my level by dragging and dropping it. Okay, and it's quite small, so let's just make it a bit more obvious. There is a button. Again, the graphics is just there for the player to know what they think they're interacting with, but in fact, again, they're going to be interacting with a trigger. There it is, and it's kind of wrapped around that button. Now, in Kismet, this time the trigger's not going to be touched, but the player's going to feel like they're interacting with that button by pressing the E key, so they're going to be using the button. So when I right click in Kismet this time, I'm going to say new event using this trigger, used, and I'm going to take that up and I'm going to use that to toggle. So we set the alarm off and it goes off and it toggles that ambient sound, and then we can use that button to toggle it back off again. Okay, again, I want that to be able to be triggered an infinite number of times, so I'm going to set that to 0. The other thing you'll want to change is this default setting of aim to interact. So this means the player would have to be aiming very specifically with their sights towards this item to interact with it, and players most of the time don't do that. So you make sure that you always turn that off unless there's a very specific reason that the player should be aiming at a location. Right, so that should all work. Let's go. Okay, I'm going up to my machine. Alarm goes off, but that's okay because I can run over here to this button and I can press E and turn it off. Okay. Other things we might want to alter are, if we have a look at the ambient sound simple toggleable, we might want it to actually start straight away, but you notice when I turned it off there was a tiny little bit of a click. It faded out very quickly. So this is when I toggle it, it's going to fade in very quickly to 1, but when I turn it off it's going to actually fade out over 1 second back down to 0. Just might sound a little bit neater. Okay, so that was because when you start it, you're starting at the beginning of the sound, beginning of the sample. It's not going to be an issue, but when you stop it, it might be halfway through playing the sound, and by toggling it off, it's just going to suddenly stop. So giving it a nice little fade out just kind of neatens it up. It's all about attention to detail. Okay, so we've got some basic interactions there. Triggers to touch, triggers to use, and from those very simple ideas, the potential to do interesting things is huge. You can do lots of different stuff with just those basic interactions. Have a look at the game audio tutorial level for some examples.